All right, welcome everyone. Let's just jump right into this. Today, we're doing a deep dive into an explainer on one of the most legendary, disturbing, and honestly profoundly fascinating survival horror franchises of all time, Silent Hill. We're going to unpack the entire history, the really deep psychology behind it, and the absolute mastery of tension that makes this series such an unforgettable masterpiece.
So what actually hides in the fog? It's kind of a simple question, right? But man, it's the exact hook that's been terrifying players since 1999. Today, we aren't just looking at a scary story. We're dissecting how a video game literally took its graphical limitations, specifically that thick, claustrophobic fog, and turned it into an enduring symbol of psychological dread. We're going to explore what truly lurks behind that white veil.
Silent Hill has this wholly unique identity in the genre. If you think back to the late 90s, survival horror was basically defined by Resident Evil, but where Resident Evil was totally rooted in action and splatter. We're talking zombies, bioweapons, shotguns, jump scares. Silent Hill was doing something entirely different. It leaned so heavily into deep psychological horror. It wasn't about just outgunning a monster. It was all about that slow, creeping terror of the unknown, and really, the fragility of the human mind itself.
To really wrap our heads around this masterpiece, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start off with Welcome to Silent Hill, then move into The Town as a Mirror. After that, we'll decode the timeline in The Chronological Order Explained, look beyond video games, and finally wrap the whole thing up with The Great Return.
Okay, part 1. Welcome to Silent Hill. Before we even start talking about characters or monsters, and trust me, we'll get there, we have to talk about the town itself. Because honestly, the setting is arguably the main character. The developers, Team Silent, built this incredible tension purely through constraints. Picture this. You're wandering through the fog. You can barely see a few feet in front of you. Your only source of light is this incredibly weak pocket flashlight. But the real stroke of genius? The radio. You find this broken pocket radio, and it emits this loud, terrifying static whenever a monster gets close. So you can hear them coming, but you can't see them. It completely strips away your power. Add in these bizarre puzzles where you're combining random stuff like a volleyball or human hair, and it just creates this surreal, dreamlike atmosphere where logic is constantly slipping away from you.
But you might be wondering, why is the town like this in the first place? Well, the in-universe history of the area is super dark. Way before the games even start. Back in the 1600s, this land in Massachusetts was actually sacred ground for Native Americans. They called it the Hill of Silent Spirits and used it to commune with the dead. Fast forward to the 1800s, and European settlers arrive and turn it into this grim penal colony. They build Brookhaven Hospital to deal with a severe epidemic, and they construct this massive underground prison right beneath Toluca Lake. Over the years, the tragedies just pile up, like the mysterious disappearance of a whole ship called the Little Baroness in the 1900s. It's like the land itself just absorbs darkness and suffering, which perfectly sets the stage for everything that comes later.
Moving right along to part 2, The Town as a Mirror.
So, Silent Hill is absolutely not your standard haunted place full of random ghosts. It's a highly personalized nightmare. If you've played the games, you already know the sound, that blaring, awful air raid siren. When that siren wails, the world literally peels away into what's called the other world. It's this completely distorted reflection of reality. The foggy streets disappear, replaced by industrial gratings suspended over bottomless pits. The walls are just dripping with ash, rust, and blood. But here's the kicker. It's not random. The otherworld physically shifts to reflect the specific trauma, the guilt, and the sins of the protagonist trapped inside it. You aren't just fighting monsters, You're fighting your own materialized demons.
To craft this kind of personalized purgatory, Team Silent pulled from a wildly eclectic mix of inspirations. It's actually fascinating. They looked at the surreal, super dreamlike films of David Lynch. They drew on the visceral horror of Stephen King novels, stuff like The Mist and The Dark Half. Visually, they leaned heavily on the distorted, really unsettling paintings of Francis Bacon to design their monsters. They even looked to classic Japanese no theater to figure out narrative structures that manipulate your emotions on a subconscious level. It's this wild blend that really elevated the series into a true psychological masterpiece.
There's this quote, "The town calls to it ordinary people, but with darkness in their hearts." That right there, that is the absolute core philosophy of Silent Hill. The town acts like a beacon. Characters like James Sunderland or Angelo Roscoe, they don't just stumble in by accident. The town specifically summons them because they harbor immense guilt, repressed memories, or just profound psychological wounds. The horror is totally customized. To survive Silent Hill, you literally have to face yourself.
All right, let's untangle things in part 3, The Chronological Order Explained.
Now, the timeline of this franchise is notoriously one of the most confusing parts of the lore. The games definitely did not come out in the order the events actually happened. If we look at the timeline chronologically, the absolute earliest point is actually the upcoming game, Silent Hill F, which is set way back in 1960s Japan. From there, we jump to 1976 for Silent Hill Origins, where a trucker named Travis Grady gets tangled up in a cult's attempt to sacrifice a young girl, Alessa. And that perfectly sets up the events of the very first game, Silent Hill 1, taking place in 1983. Then we get to what is widely considered the absolute masterpiece of the series, Silent Hill 2, which happens a decade later in 1993.
But honestly, the timeline disconnect gets even wilder as the series goes on. Take the upcoming title Silent Hill Townfall. It's slated for release in 2026, but chronologically, it's set way back in 1996. Meanwhile, Silent Hill 3 happens in the year 2000. Then you've got The Room, Downpour, and Homecoming kind of filling out the rest of the 2000s. And then, just to throw a wrench in the whole thing, you have titles like Shattered Memories. That one came out in 2009, is set in 2008, but operates in a completely alternate universe altogether. It's this massive, fascinating narrative web that pretty much turns fans into in-universe detectives.
Section 4. Beyond Video Games.
Because the world of Silent Hill is just dripping with such a dense, incredible atmosphere, its cultural footprint naturally had to expand into other media. We ended up getting 2 feature films, one in 2006 and a sequel in 2012. And look, I know video game movies are notoriously tricky, but Christoph Gans's 2006 film is actually still really heavily praised by fans today for how well it reproduces that oppressive visual design. Beyond the big screen, the lore expanded through a bunch of comic books from IDW, some really distinct manga-style comics by the original monster designer Masahiro Ito, and even several novelizations. The town's grip went way beyond just the controller in your hands.
And finally, Section 5. The Great Return.
7. I just want you to let that number sink in for a second. For 7 long years, the Silent Hill franchise suffered total radio silence. Back in 2014, Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro dropped that legendary playable teaser, PT, for a game called Silent Hills. People lost their minds. But then in 2015, the project was officially canceled by Konami. Fans were completely crushed. It honestly felt like the fog had permanently rolled in, burying the franchise in a 7-year purgatory of its own making.
But then, October 19th, 2022 happened. The Silent Hill transmission event. Seemingly out of nowhere, Konami brought the series back from the dead in a massive, massive way. They didn't just announce one game either. They unleashed an entire slate. We got the incredibly anticipated Silent Hill 2 remake by Bloober Team. They revealed Silent Hill F, taking the horror all the way to 1960s Japan. We got Silent Hill Townfall, the interactive streaming series Silent Hill Ascension, and even a new movie reboot, Return to Silent Hill, with Christoph Gans back in the director's chair. The sheer scale of this resurrection was just unprecedented.
So the big question on everyone's mind was, does the modern audience actually still care about this franchise? The answer was a resounding yes, to the tune of 5 million. The Silent Hill 2 remake absolutely shattered expectations, surpassing 5 million copies sold. That is a massive number. This incredible commercial success proved for sure that the enduring power of this franchise is still as strong as it ever was. The psychological dread, the intricate lore, and that suffocating atmosphere, it still captivates us just as deeply today.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to chew on. We've learned today that the monsters in this town aren't just random spooky creatures, right? They are direct manifestations of our deepest regrets, our fears, and our darkest secrets. So ask yourself, if you somehow got lost in the fog and Silent Hill called out to the darkness in your own heart, what monster would you face? Think about that for a bit. Thank you so much for joining me today to untangle this absolute masterpiece, and I'll catch you next time.